this is essentially a story of a transfer of power. Now these things happen all the time, right? People change jobs, or they retire, or they move, and they transition out of one role and into a new one. And sometimes it means that they help folks transition into the job that they're leaving. This is what's happening in this story. And actually, this weekend, this is happening in many United Methodist churches. It's moving time. My Facebook has been flooded with pastor friends who are moving, and this is the week that has happened in this heat, if you can imagine. And so in those churches where a transition of pastors is taking place, this Sunday is usually the very first Sunday that they spend in that new congregation. It's a time of excitement, but it's also a time of uncertainty. Of course, this transition didn't happen overnight. There have been weeks and often months of knowing that this day was coming. There have been goodbyes. There's been grief about the pastor who's leaving, along with the excitement of meeting the new person who's coming in. So it's ups and downs. It's laughter and tears. It's excitement and trepidation. Aren't you glad you're not going through this right now? I am. This is where we find ourselves in this story, though, because Elijah is about to end his tenure as the lead prophet of God. Now, Elijah has had a good run, really. He stood up to Ahab and to Jezebel. We heard the story last week about how Elijah stood up to 450 prophets of Baal, all on his own. And Elijah is regarded as the greatest prophet ever among the Jewish people, and his name is invoked every year at the Passover celebration. These are exceptional shoes to fill. His successor is named Elisha, and from here on out I'll make sure I do my best to enunciate that well, since they sound so similar. Now, Elisha, right? Elisha has been in training for just a short time. And we don't really know how long he's been apprenticing with Elijah. His name is mentioned just 4 short chapters ago in the scripture. But this is the first time since we heard Elisha's name, since we heard his call story, that we've heard his name again. So we have no idea how long that took. And so I have to think that it wasn't that long ago, and that whatever time it was, it certainly didn't feel like enough time for Elisha. Now maybe that's why Elisha doesn't want to talk about his master leaving. He knows something's up because Elijah keeps trying to leave him behind. I'm going to Bethel, stay here. That's okay, I'll go with you. I'm going to cross the Jordan, stay here. No, that's okay, I'll go with you, right? Now along the way there were other prophets that showed up and pulled Elisha aside and said, you know, don't you, that Elijah is going to leave. God's going to take your master away from you today. And Elisha's response is always this: I don't want to talk about it. Now, maybe Elisha's really grown fond of Elijah and doesn't want to think about his death. Or perhaps he doesn't feel ready to take over the prophet job. Maybe it's both. But they go. And they go to Bethel, they go beyond Bethel, they go to the Jordan. And the Jordan marks the end of the territory. Beyond the Jordan is wilderness. Beyond the Jordan is danger. Beyond the Jordan is the unknown. And that's where they're going. And it's unknown enough that the 50 prophets who decided to come along say, no, that's okay, you go ahead, we'll stay right here, that's just fine. Now, here's where the first incredible thing happens. Now, in front of them is a raging river. It isn't easy to cross the Jordan. But Elijah takes his mantle, which is the uniform of the prophet. It's a long cloth that drapes around the neck and hangs down the front. And sometimes it's called a coat, because it's sort of acted that way. But really, it's this cloth. Sometimes pastors wear a stole like this. You don't see me wear it very often, but I have one, right? So here's a stole. And this is supposed to symbolize the mantle of a prophet. So it hangs down like this. But it probably looked more like a long towel. So Elijah takes his mantle and probably whips it up like a towel he's going to snap somebody with, right? And he snaps the water. And as he snaps the water splits. And they walk across on dry ground. Now on the other side, Elijah turns to Elisha and he says, it's time. So what can I do for you before I go? And Elisha says, let me have your spirit. Better yet, make it twice your spirit. I'm going to need it where I'm going. Good choice, son. But that's a pretty big request. So if God grants it, you'll know because you'll be able to see what's about to happen. And if you can't see me as I go, then God said no. And that's when the second incredible thing happens. A chariot of fire appears, and Elijah gets on it and carries him into the sky. And Elisha can see it happen. So at this point, I hear some of you saying, great story, bro. What's that got to do with me? Well, Elisha's about to go back to the prophets and tell them that he's in charge now. He's had an encounter with God, and that has changed his life. And now he has to tell other people about it. Not only that, he has to get them to follow him. Have you ever had to convince someone that God has changed your life? Have you ever had to tell someone that you started going to church? Yeah, that's right, me. I'm going to church. Ever feel like you weren't qualified or worthy to talk to someone about God? That's where Elisha is. You see, Elisha started out as a farmer. Elijah pulled him out of the field. All these other prophets, they grew up in the church. They were born into the business. Their fathers were prophets. Their grandfathers were prophets. Their fathers were prophets. They belonged there. Elisha was a farmer. And now he was their leader. How is he going to convince them that Elijah was gone and that he left on a chariot of fire? I mean, why would they believe him? How is he going to get back across the river? Well, Elijah left his mantle behind. And he used the mantle to part the water, so perhaps it will work for Elisha. So he goes to the riverbank, he pulls off the mantle, he strikes the water, and it didn't work. This does not bode well for what he has to do, right? It's not a confidence builder. So he says, maybe I didn't do that right. No, he doesn't say that. He says, where are you, God? Come on now. And then he strikes it again, and the waters part this time, and he crosses. So step one down. Now all he has to do is convince the others. But the prophets see Elisha in the distance. And now maybe they saw the waters part, or maybe they could see something different about Elisha. But they knew, even from a distance, that the Spirit of God was on Elisha. And they came running, and they bowed down before Elisha, and they pledged to follow him. Now Elisha has a big job to do. He's going to go speak a word about God to people who aren't always willing to listen. But at least now he has some things going for him, right? He has the tap on the shoulder from Elijah. He was handpicked. Elijah endorsed him. He's got the backing of 50 prophets. They'll vouch for him. He's got the Spirit of God with him. That's the biggest one, right? He's got everything that he needs to talk about God. How about you? Do you have everything that you need to talk about God? Yes. Yes, you do. You have the Spirit of God with you. When the Spirit came at Pentecost, the Spirit went from being present in a limited number of people to being present in all of God's people. So that's you. You have the Spirit. And you have the backing of other prophets. Look around you. All of these other messengers of God, which is what a prophet is, will vouch for you. Yes, they go to church. Yes, they've got a story to tell. Yes, you should listen to them. Does that make a difference? Because it should. There are good people in this room. And you've got my endorsement. Now, I realize I'm no Elijah. People don't invoke my name on a yearly basis. But I like to think that my endorsement is worth something. So when people say that they want to become a pastor, we ask their pastor if they will endorse them. Should this person be a pastor? And we trust the word of their pastor. It means something. So when God calls you to become a pastor, you've got my endorsement. I thought that would invoke a little bit more laughter than that. Well, okay, so when you're called to talk about God with your friends, you've got my endorsement. And you have a story to tell. The power of a good witness is that you have a story to tell. And when you tell your story about the way your life has changed because of your relationship with God, people will listen. Now maybe they'll have to think about it, no matter how incredible it is. You'll get them to think about it. You'll get them to contemplate, what is it about this person's story that is so compelling? And they will give it credence because you are the witness to it. And your life is a witness to it. Your example is the witness to your faith. Your commitment to the life of faith is your witness. And your invitation for others to join you on the journey is your witness. You don't have to have all the answers to talk about God. In fact, you don't have to have any of the answers to talk about God. All you need is the Spirit and your story and the way you live your life to give credibility to your witness. And you have us to back you up. So start talking. Tell people why God is important to you and invite them to find out for themselves. You can do it. Let's pray. God, help us to witness to our faith. Help us to talk about the journey that we're on and the incredible things that happen to us just because we follow you. And when we get nervous about that, help us to remember that we have so many people in our corner, so many people on our side that will back us up, that will encourage us, that will give us advice, that will go with us if need be, that you have provided that for us in the people who are surrounding us this morning. Give us that courage and give us the strength of your Spirit. In your name we pray.